Oh, thank you, Jason, and band for leading us into that. I think that's a great place to start. Because you may feel like this graphic up here. Anybody feel like this graphic up here? That X between the rock and the... Right? And when you find yourself in that kind of spot, you feel the squeeze and the pressure and all the tension, right? And the reality is when we find ourselves in that spot, oftentimes what we do is we cheat. We cheat someone. And the person we typically cheat is either ourselves through our health, because we're pressed in and we just got to push through it and we just got to survive, or we cheat our relationships or our families because I can't, honey, because I need to stay and work longer, and I got this project, and when I get done with that, then we're going to go great time. And we cheat our budgets because the water heater went out, the car broke down, that medical bill came that I was hoping wasn't going to come, and so you cheat your finances and go into more debt. And if you find yourself in that place, that song is a great reminder about what sort of the whole purpose of a church is about. It's finding yourself among other people who understand exactly what that's like. And to find ourselves before a God who understands what that's like. In fact, the story we're going to look at today as we kick off a brand new message series on the book of Daniel is this story hidden in there of a God who was already there waiting for us to turn to him and to find him. And to find him in the midst of that little X there between that hard place and that rock. Because one of the great truths of the Bible is, wherever you find yourself, God is there. He was there before you got there. He's there when you're there. And he's even there with you as you leave and with that spot that you left. So before we jump into our brand new message, we're going to get right into the passage this day. I'm going to invite you to bow your heads and let's pray one more time together today, all right? Lord, for some of us, there is just so much going on in life right now. There's the pressures, there's the bills, there's the deadlines, there's the tension, there's the talk that we need to have but we don't want to have. There's the diagnosis we probably ought to figure out, but we don't want to. There's the questions we have, the hurts we have, the hopes and the dreams and the plans and the next steps that we have, and all of them find themselves at times squeezed out by what life brings us and all its stuff. And today as we're gathered in this room, Father, I just simply pray for myself and anybody else like me who needs to know that you're there with us. And that we weren't designed to be in that tension the whole time and let that tension wear us down and shape us and change us into something that we're not and we don't want to be, that you don't want us to be. So this morning I ask you to begin to speak through these old words and this old story that so many of us in this room and us watching online have heard from when we were kids. And others haven't heard that story, but it's a story of hope and of faith and of choices. And if it can help us make some of those today and experience some of those today, we ask you to do that for us now in your name. Amen. If you want to follow along, we're actually over in the book of Daniel in the Old Testament, Daniel chapter 1. the very beginning. We're going to spend the next few weeks going through this whole book and looking at these stories. Oftentimes when you hear about the book of Daniel, if you've been around a church much, you think about the prophecies and all the stuff about God telling things hundreds and even thousands of years before they happen, and that's where people like to focus on, when in reality, this is a story, a true story, a story of some captives. They get pulled out of their country as this other country takes in. The big power of the day was this Babylonian power. It kind of sort of ruled the world, and its job, how it handled it was it would go around to different countries and it would invade them. Sometimes it would beat their allies, and in this case, we find the nation of Israel, their ally Egypt, which is kind of a weird connection if you know much about your Bible. They have sort of, Babylon has beat Egypt in this big battle, and so now they come to Jerusalem and they say to the people there, we're going to give you the opportunity. You sign a truce with us, and we'll be buddies now because you no longer have that buddy, and everything will be great. There's just a few things that have to kind of take place to remind you of who's in charge. And that's where we find ourselves, 605 BC, over 2,000 years ago, over 2,600 years ago now. This story, and again, it's not just a Bible story, it's actually been verified in history records and things they've discovered. Here's the story as it picks up in verse 2. The Lord allowed Nebuchadnezzar to capture Joachim, king of Judah. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but it's interesting to know that the very beginning says, by the way, God let this other foreign king come into his people's house, his people's place, and do something. And it's just a reminder again that sometimes God lets things happen in our life just to kind of get our attention or to maybe stop us in our tracks. But it goes on. King Nebuchadnezzar ordered Ashpenaz, which is a great name. Everybody say it with me. Ashpenaz. I have no idea if that's the correct pronunciation, but that's my version, all right? Ashpenaz, his chief, to bring some of the young men of Judah into his palace. Nebuchadnezzar was following this time-honored tradition that a lot of conquering powers did. They would come into a place and they would come to the folks and they would take out some key people and they would take those people sort of hostages back to their country and they would begin to indoctrinate them. They would infuse them with their culture, and oftentimes they would send those people back to their original culture in order to say, you guys have no idea that our culture here is not as good as over there, that this is how things ought to operate. And so that's what he does. He tells his chief to bring some of the young men to his palace, and he wanted them to be from important families, including the family of the king of Judah. He wants to get the important people, the powerful people, the people that the average person would have looked up to and said, well, if they're going and they go along with that, we probably ought to go along with that. And there's a set of specifics that he was looking for. They were to be handsome and well-educated. They were to be capable of learning and understanding. And they were able to serve in his palace. The king wanted him to find among this group of young men from these important families the sharp ones, the good-looking ones, the people that were open to learning, the people that had some abilities. He didn't just want average people. He wanted the people that kind of stood out as leaders because he was going to do something for them and in them and to them. Ashpenaz was to teach them the language and the literature of the Babylonians. So here you have this group of young men that are taken from their country. It's about 1,000-mile distance between where they've captured and Babylon when they end up there. It's this long trip, and you can only imagine what goes through their minds. And we have to guess they're probably teenagers at this point. And I don't know if you remember what it was like to be a teenager, but you can imagine being a teenager having to walk over 1,000 miles. What kind of comments do you think teenagers would make walking 1,000 miles? I don't want to go. No, I'm not belittling you teenagers. It's just, we've all been teenagers, all right? So, well, no, I don't really. But this was kind of serious because if they misbehaved, they might lose their life. And so they go this long distance. And after going this long distance, who knows how long it takes them to get there, they're sort of in a mindset to say, this has been a terrible journey. What's lying ahead for us? What's going to happen when we get to Babylon? When they get there, they discover that the king gave, that is, he assigned the young men a daily ration of the royal food and the wine he drank. Which you have to imagine, these people were from the rich families, the important families in Judah, and so they would have been kind of accustomed to a little bit better food than just sort of the regular stuff that everybody ate, and so all of a sudden they discover the king is giving them something from his own table. This was the best food. This wasn't going to be just some bread and water. This was going to be the good stuff. The young men were to be educated for 3 years, and then they would become servants of the king of Babylon. 3 years of training, and when Daniel, who we're going to look at in just a moment, when he gets there with these other young men, they would have gone through this whole transformation. As soon as they got there, their clothes would have been taken from them. They would have been given these different sets of clothes, different kinds of clothes. Their head would have been shaved because that's how they did it there to honor their gods. They would have given them an earring. They would have, started to educate them. They'd start to teach them stuff, this language, this literature. They were going to indoctrinate them into the Babylonian culture to kind of press that in and try to press out what they had believed and heard before. So among these young men were a guy named Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And if you've been around church from birth, you know the story, right? How many of you already know the story? All right, just get up and go home then, all right? There's people in the back, and they need to sit down, all right? But you kind of already know the story. I already know how this is going to end. You already kind of have it played out, We have little slogans. Dare to be right? Dare to stand. Yeah, see, a bunch of you know. And it's the stories we want our kids to know because there's these great stories. But sometimes when we think of those great stories, we forget something. That this great story comes from an actual story. A story with all the pressures, all the tension, all the push that would have been part of that. And can you imagine, as a teenager, let's say between the age of 12 and say 17, you getting grabbed out of your homeland, taken 1,000 miles away, plopped down someplace else, and all it is you and a bunch of people that you've seen around, other teenagers your age, and that's where you're at. And they take everything away from you, and they give you some kind of weird clothes that are really nice, but they're just different. Your hair's all gone. And if you were a teenager like me back in the 70s, you loved long hair, right? And then you end up with this look, and you go, And that's what they would have had. And they begin all this pressure going on. But Ashpenaz, the chief officer, gave them names. They changed their names as well. So they no longer were Daniel and the rest of the guys. They were now Daniel's name was now Belteshazzar, Hananiah's was Shadrach, Mishael's was Meshach, and Azariah's was. So the names are changed. They didn't ask for the names. They apparently didn't have much input into it because each of these talk about the gods that were part of Babylon. This was a way of changing them. This is what your name. This is what you're going to be called from now on. Any of you ever get a nickname when you were a kid that you did not like? Anybody, just raise your hand. I'm not going to ask you to share it with me. Raise it nice and high, right? And a lot of you, right? Kids can be creeps. But you get those names and you have no choice, and especially if you don't really like it and you want to change it, and then you find yourself it just makes it worse, right? Because maybe you get an extra nickname to go along with that. Sometimes you just don't have a choice, and that's where Daniel and the rest of these guys find themselves. They don't have a lot of choice. They have been taken as captives. They've been put here. All the stuff is starting to change, and now they're going to begin this 3-year process of learning, of changing, of getting ready to serve this foreign king's palace and in his governing body. And it's at this point in the story that Daniel recognized something that we at times miss when it comes to the impact of our surroundings. Because all of us are impacted by our surroundings, aren't we? Sometimes we're impacted for good things, and sometimes we're impacted for not so good things. Some of you can look back in stories in your life of times when you go, man, I wish I would have picked a better group of friends because that particular group of friends did not turn out to be that good of a group of friends. Sometimes going to work for that company and what I had to give up. When I say give up, it wasn't money. I made more money. I had more position. I was moving up the ladder. But what I had to give up in my own personal life and my time with for myself and my time with my significant other or the time with my family, that went away. And Daniel begins to recognize something as all the stuff has changed. His clothes has changed. His hair's changed. He's got the earring. He's got the new name. And he sees this food that's getting put down on the table. He begins to recognize that what the Babylonians are trying to do is to change them so that his people back in Judah will be changed as well. And we get to the passage that says Daniel decided that as he set his heart not to eat the king's food or drink his wine because that would defile him. Daniel made up in his teenage mind he wasn't going to do this. Now, this is probably not the attitude that your teenager may have done at some point. It's probably not the attitude you did as a teenager at some point, because here to say that kind of stuff and to think that kind of stuff could land you in one spot and one spot only. They have plenty of other teenagers that just kill you, right? Or maybe if you're fortunate, they'll throw you out and just let you do hard labor for the rest of your life. But Daniel makes the decision because he recognized something is going on, and for Daniel, this was more than just about food. It was what the food symbolized. Because the king's food, we're told, would have been food that was offered, first of all, to their gods. You know, you go give some gods your food. How much food does a god eat? I've never noticed a god that ate any food. So, but, you know, you go offer it, and they're not taking the whole stuff. They just take a little bit because they know the god isn't going to eat it. So, and you may have seen some of these shrines around. If you've traveled around the world, you go up and you see little bits of food there, right? You notice it's never like a huge banquet of food. Because you don't waste a whole huge banquet on the gods. You give them just a little bit, right? Because you know tomorrow, yeah, you just need to be there. Well, get rid of it, you know. Or you know, one of the priests kind of sneaks a little bit because you got to be some kind of perk for the job, right? But you know, it kind of sits there. Not a lot. So, but this food would have been dedicated to them, and now it's brought to them. And Daniel recognizes this means more than just some great food. Because this would have been, the idea that you're eating off the king's table, the food the king's eating, you're getting to eat, would have been a great privilege. And you got to imagine, these are teenage boys. How many of you had teenage boys in your house? Do you know how much food a teenage boy can put away? My youngest son one time made me a bet. And I'm normally pretty good about bets. I normally only bet when I'm 100% sure. This is my one failure in life. That's my confession today. We were going to Chipotle, not necessarily a plug for the brand, but I'm just telling you the story. We went to Chipotle's. So we're getting a burrito, and my son says, I'm really hungry. I want 2 burritos. To which I said, there's no way I'm buying you a second burrito because you're not going to eat it. I mean, it's just too much. I could barely finish one. There's no way you, he's small. There's no way, at that time, he's real small. There's no way you're going to eat 2. So I told him, here's how the deal works. It cost me, let's say it's $5 for a burrito. I don't know how much it is, but we're going to use that. It's easier math for me. $5 for a burrito, so here's how it works. You know, if you eat it, I'll give you the $5 it cost, and I'll also pay for it. If you lose, you not only pay for that burrito, you pay for my burrito. So, you know, I forgot I'm going to come out okay in this. Stupid kid ate both those things. I have no idea where he put it either. I watched him carefully, and I made sure, and when he got done, he didn't get up and run to the restroom either. He had to sit there for a while. But you know, teenage kids can eat a lot, and the idea that here's this great food, and it smells great, and it's the best food around, but Daniel makes this decision. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to defile myself, because for him, this is, again, what it symbolizes. It's not just about the food, but what it symbolized to him. And there was a point when he said, you know, there's so much I kind of go along with because it's just around me, but at some point I say, enough's enough. That here's the line in the sand. And here's the crazy thing. Daniel made up his mind before he knew how the story ended. Because when we read the story and we tell our kids, dare to be like Daniel, we know their end result, right? But Daniel had no clue how this is going to go. In fact, I think Daniel knows how this most likely will go. And it was a bad choice, right? Because for him to say no to the king and no to this whole process meant most likely that he's going to die. But Daniel says, no, this is the line. I'm not going past it. I'm stopping at this thing. And here's the reality. Daniel recognized something. If you cheat once, it's easier to cheat the second time. You know, you fudge a little bit on your expense account. Next time, just a little easier, you know. Take a first drink, second one's always easier. Take that pill, second one's always easier. Cheat on that test, second time's always easier. In fact, not only is it easier, we begin to expect it, right? Because somebody says to you, hey, Jerry, You did this last time? And you're like, oh yeah. So Daniel recognized at some point you got to have a line in your life. You got to have a thing. And this is not a religious thing. This is an everything thing. Because all of us recognize and experience this sort of unseen barriers in our life that we know I probably shouldn't, but if I do, and I don't know if I ought to go. We all have those kinds of things. We all know the experience of going past that line and then going, oh no, but now it's too late because I'm there. So Daniel decides. And here's the thing I don't want us to miss. Compromise doesn't lessen the tension. It simply drains our resolve. See, we think when we're underneath that pressure that if I just kind of give in this time, it's going to make things better. And if I just work this weekend, maybe the boss will get off my back. That'll lower the tension. Maybe, I'm trying to lose weight, but if I just, have this meal, then it'll be okay. A little dessert, then can't be that bad. I'll get back on track tomorrow. I mean, tax season is coming up, and there's lots of ways to kind of work those numbers, and if I just do it, maybe a little finances will be a little better for me. But compromise doesn't lessen the tension. It simply drains our resolve because the next time becomes easier because we've always done it the first time. And Daniel recognized what was going on around him. And some of the stuff he didn't fight against. He didn't fight against the clothes. Didn't fight against the haircut. Didn't fight against the earring. Didn't fight against the names. But for him, the food was the line that he sort of drew in the sand and said, I can't do this and I can't do that. This is where I'm going to stand and I'm not going to go any farther with it. This was a defining moment for Daniel. And some of you have had defining moments in your life. In fact, as I've talked to people over the years of being a pastor, it's amazing how many different sort of events turn out to be defining moments. Sometimes they're these huge things that just sort of blow up or expand so much. Sometimes it's just a very simple thing, but people will look back after years and say, Mike, right there, this is when was a defining moment when I said, no, I wasn't going to do that anymore, or yes, I'm going to start doing that because I really need to. I'm going to make this step. I'm going to say, this is what I'm going to do, or this is what I'm not going to do, and I'm going to stand firm on that. And because I did that, my life changed. Lots of things changed. Because it was a defining moment. And here's the crazy thing for Daniel. He makes this a defining moment. And then he comes up with a plan. And it is a terrible plan. Oh, wait, before I get there. Saw this great quote from Chip Berg. I think that's his name. I don't know. He runs Levi Strauss. But you guys like Levi jeans? This is the guy that runs it, right? But I love his statement. Always do the harder right, not the easier wrong. Always do the harder right, not the easier wrong, because we all know it's easier to do the wrong, right? But to do the harder right than the easier wrong sets us up to make it easier to do the harder stuff instead of making it easier to do the wrong stuff. And all of us have to have those defining moments. And again, this is not just a religious thing. This is a people thing. You all have areas in your life where, you need to make those kind of pieces or decisions, and maybe that'll encourage you. But let's get back to the story. So, Daniel comes up with this plan. And again, it's a terrible plan, right? And he says to Ashpenaz, this is the chief of everything, he asks him for permission not to defile himself in this way. Can you imagine how that conversation went? Sir, I got a question. I'm asking. Get my little teenage voice. I got to break a little bit. I'm asking that I not be defiled this way by eating the king's food. Which I have to imagine the chief, of all this whole group that's getting educated, probably thought, hold on a second, cowboy, who do you think you are? Right? I mean, A, who do you think you are to say I'm not going to eat this stuff, and B, to call this food defiling? Because I don't get to eat from the king's table. I got to watch you guys. These people we're training. You guys get it, the king gets it, me. I don't get this stuff, and you're calling it defiling? I mean, can you imagine all the thoughts that go, you ever had somebody challenge you like that? Ask for something that's just out of the question, that's impossible, and that's offending in the process. But Daniel does it. He asked for permission not to defile himself in this way. And I love this. Now God, this is one of those now God moments, and maybe you've had some of these now God moments in your life, that you discover something, that God was already at work even before you made the decision, but the only way you discovered that he was at work was when you made the decision. Anybody else on that? Now God made Ashpenaz, the chief officer, want to be kind and gracious to Daniel. So when Daniel asks this dumb question, it comes up with this terrible plan. God is already at work, but he doesn't discover it until he says, I won't do this. And I won't do this because I can't do it. And I can't do it because I won't do it. This is my line. This is, the rest of it's going on, but here I can't go any farther. But Ashpenaz, who is now by God sort of been made to be kind of kind and gracious, to kind of think, maybe I ought to give the kid a break here. He says to Daniel, Daniel, I am afraid of my master, the king. And if you go back in history, you would understand why he is so afraid. Babylonians were a vicious group of folks. Brutal. And we sometimes read some stories or see some videos even today of some terrible, terrible stuff that's happening even currently. That's the kind of stuff they would do. Wipe out whole civilizations and just, burn their cities down. I'm afraid of my master. He's the one that's allotted, that is assigned your food and drink. So this isn't just he's over there, I'm going to be, I'm afraid of him. This is the fact that he sort of said, give these guys my food, my drink. And you're saying, I'm supposed to go tell him they don't want it? I'm afraid. If you begin to look worse, that is thinner than the other young men your age, the king will see this. The king's going to figure this out. And he's going to say, uh-oh, and then you will forfeit my head to the king. So thanks for asking, Daniel, but really dumb plan. I want to be nice to you, but listen, my hands are sort of tied because if you look thinner, and let's face it, if you go from eating some really great food from the king's table, and you can only imagine what it was, but you have to imagine it was rich, and you want to, again, if you know the story, what they ask for is this whole, let us just eat some vegetables and some water. You kind of go, well, of course they're going to look thinner, right? Especially a teenage boy. But here's the cool thing. That's what he tells Daniel. I want you to notice the next verse. Daniel spoke to the guard, that is the attendant, whom the chief officer had assigned over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So he's told the big chief, here's what I want to do. The chief said, I'd like to help you, but my hands are kind of tied. Wink, wink. It doesn't say that in there, but I kind of think there's a wink, wink in there. Because now Daniel goes and talks to the attendant that's over his group, who this guy put over a group, and here's what happens. He says to this guy, listen, just give us 10 days. I'm asking this 10 days. It's not a long time. If we start to look a little too thin in 10 days, we can change this stuff or something else can happen. I don't know. But give us 10 days. Don't give us anything but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Which again, if you've ever been a teenager, you know that probably having just vegetables to drink and water to drink is not high on your list of caloric intake, right? Then compare how we look with how the other young men look who eat the king's food. Do a comparison, see for yourself, and then decide how you want to treat us, your servants. Just give us 10 days. That's all I can really ask for, and I'm trying to be fair to you, and I want you just to be fair to me. But at the end of 10 days, if it doesn't work, you got to do what you got to do. But here's my line, and by the way, the guys are with me. Us together, us four are all in this kind of line. This is where we're at. So he asked the attendant, not the chief, the attendant. The attendant says, hey, you're great. We'll give this a shot. Here's the conclusion. After 10 days, they looked healthier and better fed. That is, their flesh was fatter, which always blows my mind. Because I don't know how some teenage boys are getting fatter, eating vegetables and water. They must have had some other vegetables back then. I don't know, but they're getting fatter than the other guys who are over there, slopping down the king's food and having some wine and are feeling, good about life. And they're going, really? You guys are eating vegetables? Come over here and smell the steak. It's camel, by the way, because that's what they had back then. I don't know that part. I just made it. But here we go. So they look better. They're healthier. And if you know the rest of the story, it goes on. The king sees them later and goes, not only are they healthier, they're smarter. They seem like the top of their class. And they actually get a promotion. And they get moved up the chain. And it all turns out wonderful and great. And sometimes we run to that part, be like Daniel. Make your decision, and God will come through and do all this kind of wonderful stuff. But I want you to notice that Daniel, when he made those statements, when he made the first declaration and he got in his mind, I'm not going to do it, when he asked the chief, when he asked his attendant, all those kinds of things, Daniel did not know the end of the story. In fact, if you had asked Daniel what the most likely end of the story was, the story would have been not so good. Because who gets fatter and looks better on vegetables for 10 days? Somebody's eating all that great stuff. How do they not get fatter? And here's the thing I want you to know. Following God will cost you something. It always cost us something. For Daniel, it literally was a life or death choice. And I know sometimes when we hear these stories, we think, yeah, Mike, I know, but you don't know the situation I'm in. And you're right. You don't know what's going to happen, what my boss has said if I don't do that, and you're exactly right. I don't know what you're going through, and I know that all Daniel was facing was death, and I'm sure what you're going through is much greater than that. You might lose your job. You might have to back away from that relationship. You might have to lower the amount of schooling, have to go to school a little longer. And you're right. I don't know what's going on. But you already think in your mind, you know what's going to happen, right? If I do that, this is what's going to result. I'm going to lose the job. I'm going to go to school longer. I may not get this. I may have to take that. I might have to get my credit. All that kind of stuff that goes through our mind. But if that's the kind of stuff that goes in your mind, I want to remind you of something very important. That's the point. Because that stuff goes through your mind. Because when Daniel made that decision, when he said, this is my line, I'm not going to defile myself with the king's food, then when I've decided in my mind this is where it's at, Daniel did not know the end of the story. And you cannot know the end of the story. Even if you think you do. Because I've heard too many stories from other people. I've experienced stuff in my own life that wouldn't have come out the way it should have if I hadn't done it. And that's not to say the story's always going to end up like Daniel. We're going to look at another story in a couple of weeks that, these guys recognize that. But here's the other part of it. Following God will cost you something, but so will not following. And the question is, which one will cost you more? For Daniel, it was kind of saying, it cost me a little bit here, I lost my hair, got these funky clothes on, got my name changed. Wasn't especially in favor of the first one, but now I really don't like it, But this was too much. This was the line that got drawn. And the reality is the decisions we make today determine the stories that we tell tomorrow. And the stories that we told in our past were determined by those stories in our past. And nobody in this room knows how their story ends. You have a projected view of what it would be like, what you hope it would be? If you're in school, you're kind of thinking about one day I'd like to be this or that. For our teenagers and even college-age people, how many of you are working in the job you thought you were going to do when you were 18 years old? Everybody raise your hand real high if you are doing the job you thought you were going to do 18 years old. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm going to do a rough count, about 12 people out of this group. My point is, you don't know how your story ends, right? How many of you are not with a person that you were madly in love with when you were 16 years old? How many are not with the person you were in love with at 16 years old? I'm going to believe some of you are not raising your hands because you're not being truthful, right? You just don't want to raise your hand. You got an attitude like those teenage boys come out of Babylon. Eat some vegetables for a while. Maybe that'll get your attitude straight, but let's wrap up this what if. What if you face the tensions in your life, and we all have tensions in our life. And we all have those tensions, and we believe that if I just sort of, maybe I give a little bit here, it's going to get better. Well, we all recognize it doesn't necessarily get better. It just sort of drains resolve to try to kind of stand up to that. So we work a weekend, and then we work a few, and then we're kind of on a regular schedule. You know, you got into debt, and you got into more debt. And now you've been calling those 800 numbers that you hear about on the radio or TV that can get you out of any kind of credit problems. But what if you face the tensions in your life by defining where the line is? Because I think we all have to have a line at some place. A line that says, I'm not going to cross this, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to go further than this. And maybe you're in a situation where you've gone past that line, but you know you need to sort of redraw that line, because that whole thing of it's easier the second time, and what you did before gets expected the next time, and now you find yourself just way too deep. What if God already has a now God moment waiting for you for when you draw that line? See, Daniel had no clue how his story ended. He had no clue that God had already made the chief who was taking care of all these guys who were overseeing all that stuff, already made him favorable to him. And he would never have known that unless he had made a line in his life and said, this is it. And I don't know what your line is. I know what my line is. For some of us, it's easy to draw that line one time, and that sets the stage for the rest of stuff. And for others of us, it's continually drawing that same line over and over and over again, because we know how important that line is, because if we give any inch to that line, we know it will just open up so much more stuff. But I believe in a God who isn't just waiting for us to make the decision so he'll do something for us. I believe in a God who has already set up stuff for when we make that decision, it's already ready for us. And whatever we face, we can be sure that if we find ourselves between that rock and that hard place, and we're kind of in that middle, that God is in the middle even with us.